Hello, my name is JoAnn Almonte with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. Today is July 14th. We are currently in the Elaine Legacy Center in Elaine, Arkansas. Before we begin this oral history interview, can you begin by telling us your name and how it's spelled, please?
Yes, Jennifer Hadlock, Jennifer, Hadlock, Had as in David, Lock.
Thank you very much. Can you tell us when and where you were born?
1971, September 25th in San Diego, California.
That's a long way from here. Why did you move to Elaine?
Oh, my family moved a lot. I only was in San Diego for 3 days.
Wow.
I was just born there, that's all. Then we moved to Oakland, Texas, New York City, New Zealand, England, and Connecticut. Yeah.
You're a bit of a traveler. So what was your childhood like, having moved all those places?
Well, until I was 10, I was always the new kid in school. And then when we moved to outside New Haven, I became like the leader of the outcast kids.
And
I have 3 younger siblings.
Mm-hmm. Oh, tell us about your siblings.
I'm the oldest, and then I have a brother who lives in Hawaii, and then I have 2 sisters who live in Massachusetts. And I have 7 nieces and nephews, and I have 2 stepchildren who are grown.
With your parents, what did they do when you were growing up?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom until we settled, and then she became a teacher, and she taught 3rd and 4th graders. And I mean, she dropped out of college when she got pregnant with me. So my dad was in the Navy. That's why I was born in San Diego. So he was in Vietnam. So he left. I was born, and then he left for a year, and then came back, and then left again. So he was gone for like the first 3 years of my life. And then we moved to Texas with the Navy, and then he started working for Mobile Chemical. He was a human resources person. Like, that's why we moved around.
So then where did you guys finally settle? Was it here?
No, in New Haven, Connecticut. Yeah, I actually am from New York City, but I've been here in Elaine, or actually I'm staying in Helena, not in Elaine, for the last year, doing research with the Legacy Center.
And what does your research consist of?
I'm documenting the oral stories from the descendants of the massacre, and particularly looking at the land theft. And that's led me to kind of trying to understand what the wealthy planters, white planters, were trying to do and thinking about, and how their descendants still to this day, over 100 years later, are still doing the same thing.
Could you get a little bit more specific into that? Like, in case anybody doesn't know and you just want to give a crash course on the events that happened.
So in 1919, at the end of Red Summer, here in Phillips County, well, there were black communities that had landowners that had been pretty prosperous and building. There's Ferguson, which is a little south of here, that had so many black landowners that the town itself was named after the black family. They were the post office, like the postmaster. They were giving land to other black people, and they granted land to build a church. So there was a school, everything. There was a lumber company called Fathauer Lumber Company that was starting to farm in, and the owner of that actually lived in Chicago on Lakeshore Drive, so he had lots of money. But his workers were trying to organize, so they were meeting with Bratton, an attorney, a white attorney from out of town, and they heard, then some white folks came from Helena and said, oh, you're going to have to end your little meeting here with the sharecroppers and the farmers. And they took him to jail. And then that night at Hoopsburg, which is a little north of Elaine, there was a meeting in the church to plan what they were going to say to the lawyer. They hadn't heard that the lawyer was arrested. And some sheriff came supposedly to arrest someone in Elaine, a white guy in Elaine who was drunk. Who knows what the real reason was they came down. They shot into the church. There was people started running, and then a massacre happened. Up to 1,000 or more black people were murdered. The governor heard that this was going on, so he sent federal troops in, and they, instead of helping people, actually killed more black people. There's stories about black people being buried all over the place. Also, some stories about white people being murdered because the black soldiers were like, "Oh, we're not taking this lying down." So and still being covered up by the same landowners. So less than a month later, like 2 weeks later, one of the landowners who still owns a bunch of land, Solomon, bought the land from Fathauer so that nobody could sue Fathauer like they were planning to and get their money for their goods. I know it's a little confusing. Was that too confusing? Okay. So Solomon still owns land. Fathauer, not so much, but he actually still has some property rights to like natural gas, or if you find minerals under the land, even though he doesn't own the land right now, his family still can get anything that's discovered. They can still get money from that.
Yeah, wow, that sounds like a lot. And so you're an academic who's come down here to research all of these stories.
I'm not an academic.
Oh, sorry, a researcher, sorry.
I'm a genealogist. That's my work. I have a business, genealogy. But I'm on the board of a group called the Fund for Reparations Now that works with the National African American Reparations Commission to implement a 10-point plan of reparations for black people. And the fund gets white people to give funds into this pot of money, and then we distribute it to places that deserve reparations to start implementing the 10-point plan. And Elaine is the first place that we provided funds to be able to do repair of these harms that happened and to build a museum to tell the story from the point of view of the black people whose land was stolen and who were murdered and their descendants, rather than the whitewashed version that has been told by the person who bought the land right after. So the Solomons are the ones who put up the memorial that's in Helena, and they're still controlling the water situation in the Helena Harbor.
So speak more to this water situation. What can you share with your insights?
Oh, the water situation. Well, it's pretty complicated, but well, here, I didn't realize this when I first came, but the Mississippi River, the White River, and the Arkansas River all converge here, just a little south of us. And there's more fresh water here in this area than anywhere else in the country. Memphis, which is just north of here, is the only large city in the country that actually gets their source of water, drinking water, is from an aquifer rather than from some other source. So it's from the ground. They're still getting water that way. Recently, Helena, West Helena, which is just north of us here in Elaine, that's the county seat where the courthouse is, Those were two towns. Helena was a town on its own. It's the original town right on the river. It's like where the wealthier people were. That's where the Solomons tried to control all the land along, and are still trying to control all the land along the river to build a terminal. And they're building their own private water tower. They just got more money from the federal government for that yesterday. The Horners is another wealthy family that was around at the time of the massacre and before, that was also trying to control things, and they finally decided, oh, we're going to build a separate town just right here because we could make more money that way. So they bought a bunch of land and created West Helena, and West Helena has a very clear divide from the land documented that I've been finding. It's built right up before 1919. There's deeds that say no white people can live here. I've never seen that anywhere else. And there's deeds that say no black people can live here. So there's a very specific, like, this is where the black people live, this is where the white people live. And one of the deeds was sold to the Solomons, who were Jewish. Their son-in-law, Rothschild, was given a plot of land on the no white people can live here side. Kind of saying, you're Jewish, not white. So I think there's some bad blood from that. And then that just continued on till today. But the West Helena side, their water system fell apart. In 2006 or something, the two towns merged and became one government, but they still have two separate water systems. And I guess they haven't been taking care of the West Helena side, so the West Helena water crashed. It's like Flint or Jackson. And so people didn't have water for a couple weeks. It's still a boil order. There have been boil orders off and on, so nobody trusts being able to drink the water. People weren't able to, do anything. There was no water when you turned on the tap. That has sort of temporarily been fixed. Lakeview, that's just north of here, which is a historical spot because it was created by the federal government and HUD to be a black town where black land ownership happened. They actually kicked some people off the land to then let people buy property for a low amount, but they were highly screened black families, so they came from other places, then lived there and built a whole community. I think you've interviewed some of the people from there, so it has a beautiful story. There are some sad aspects to that, but anyway, their water system has completely been a mess, and some of the white landowner farmers actually could fix it because they're affected by it, but they're choosing not to, and we think it's basically so that the farmers can they have been starting to buy up the land there so that they can take it over, and the school's already been closed. There is no grocery store left. Everything has been falling apart there, and the water system is dying. So there's all that going on. Meanwhile, there's tons of water here, and there's irrigation everywhere, and then they spray all kinds of chemicals on that, and then that water is washing into the ditches, which then people have cancer and lupus. I think there has to be a connection.
That's a lot to process. You mentioned some other problems that are plaguing this community, such as lack of schooling, lack of other resources. Can you shed some light on those?
So the building that we're in was the white school. The black school was when you first come into Elaine. Recently, last month, got knocked down, but the building was falling in. That was the black school. And then they had integration here, I think in the late 70s, early 80s. It did not go great. And the white families basically pulled their kids and sent them to private school. So there's two private schools that are pretty much only white, 98% white. And if you work for the big farmers, they pay your tuition to go to the private school. So all the black children that were coming here, the number of them was dwindling, and I guess they were having a hard time keeping teachers, although there's wonderful stories too about being a student here, and the community is wonderful, and everybody knows each other, and but they shut down this school, the state did. So all the people who live south of here that came here have to go even further, and they moved all the kids to Marble School, which is about 30 minutes from here, but some kids were coming 30 minutes south of here to get to here, so it's another hour. Lakeview School, which is just north of here, that was the town I was talking about earlier. A lawyer, a black lawyer, sued to try and get funding for Lakeview and all this area, saying that the state was not giving equal amounts of funding to black schools as they were to mostly white schools. And when he won that lawsuit, so that would have to be fixed, the state closed the school down to punish the area. So that school got closed. I think that happened before the Elaine school got closed. That school got closed, then the Elaine school got closed. So, yeah, and now, since Sarah Huckabee Sanders has been governor, there's a new law that says you can get a voucher to go to private school. So I think even more of the white people will be able to go to private school. And their charter schools are wanting to come. They're going to have a charter school take over the Marble Elaine school. I have mixed feelings about it, because otherwise they were going to close the school and have everybody go to another school. So I think the powers that be really, they don't want black people to be here, so they just make it harder and harder to be here.
Sorry, this is, again, so much.
Mm-hmm.
Why Elaine for your research?
Well, like I said before, I'm part of the Fund for Reparations Now, and this was our first project. And the reason we chose this is because there was a commissioner from the National African American Reparations Commission, Dr. Iva Carruthers. Can you still hear me? Dr. Iva Carruthers, who had a relationship with the Legacy Center, and there was 100 years since 1919 in 2019, and they wanted to build the museum, and so it seemed like a good time, and it was implementing one of the points of the NARC 10-point plan to commemorate or to memorialize different sites of trauma. So we decided this was a good spot to do our first project. And in building a relationship with the Legacy Center, they said one of the things they needed was a white attorney from the North to come and go into the courthouse here and look at the land records. And I am a white attorney from the North. So after COVID, I was kind of between jobs, and I said I could come for a month. So last July, I came for a month and got into the courthouse and realized how much there was here. And then we've been able to raise funds so that I could stay and get paid a stipend to be here for the rest of this, for like a few months at a time, to continue the research, just because, like I said, all what I was explaining to you, it's a lot to try and understand and figure out how is this happening.
So why do you think they asked specifically for a northerner white attorney to do this research for them?
Well, racism. So the courthouse was controlled by someone who would not have let other people be able to go in and look at things. At this point, that has shifted, and now there's a new person controlling some of the documents, so that might be less necessary now, although who knows? It's hard to know because it's working how we have it at the moment. But yeah, there's always people who could stop things from happening.
All right, and circling back to the NARC 10-point plan, are you able to share any of those points on that list?
I should be able to, but I do not have them memorized by heart. No.
That's good.
Do you want me to look them up? If you pause, I could look them up.
I don't know if I can pause on this.
Okay.
I'm not skilled with this video equipment, so I'm not sure. Oops. But all right. In that case, we can circle back to the, well, not circle back, but go into the Elaine Legacy Center. So, what do you do here? How long have you been involved with this Legacy Center?
Well, my role is to do the research, but I'm also helping with the organizing. I'm a longtime community organizer, so I'm doing some support work for the organizing to try and get a better water system and to fight for reparations for all the different things that have happened. So that's the role that I've been playing, but mainly the work that I've been hired to do is the research in the courthouse. And I came in April 2022 was the first time I came in person, but we first met on Zoom back in 2019, early 2020. And I've been part of the Fund for Reparations now since then. So I guess, 2020. And so we've been Zooming, and then finally we're able to meet in person, and now I've been coming here and staying to really be able to do the research and to understand what I'm looking at in the legal documents. It's not as straightforward as, oh, well, there you can see this person sold to this person, and then there it's obvious what's going on. That's not how it is. And then there was no computer system because it broke down, and different things have happened in the courthouse to make it challenging to be in the courthouse. I try not to be paranoid that that's on purpose, but
that's completely understandable. Mm-hmm. But currently they're doing like a food drive. So what does organizing look like for the community in regards to the Elaine Legacy Center?
Oh, well, the food distribution is because we're in a food desert. I mean, the grocery store is a Dollar General. And that's here. This is the big city. I know when you're here, it's kind of like, this is the big city, and there's 550 people. But yeah, compared to south of here, this is the big city. So everyone that lives south of here, that is struggling, they come here for food distribution too. And then we're in a very poor area of the Delta. There's a lot of poverty. So one of the things that the Legacy Center does is distribute food once a month. So people come and they get goods that will last over the month. Some fresh, but a lot of dry goods too. That's just one of the things that the Legacy Center does as like a community service more than organizing. The organizing is, I guess, standing up to the people who are trying to change the story and say that there were no black landowners and that almost no one was killed during the massacre, and their version is a little different. And so mainly the point is trying to get the descendants to be able to share their story. And I'm just trying to get any paper documentation that we can to prove those things.
All right, and you, as I take it, you're not a descendant. So what is it that non-descendants, whether they be in Elaine or not in Elaine, what can they do for the descendants of the Elaine massacre?
Well, you could give money directly to the Legacy Center or into the Fund for Reparations Now to go to other reparations. It could help by, right now, calling the governor of Arkansas and say that she should be giving some of her $1.1 billion surplus to this area to fix and give a whole new water system. Mainly also just paying attention and telling the story, sharing the story. There's a movie that folks from here created that actually you could do a viewing of that movie. People from here Zoom to different places. You could invite people from here to come and tell the story. What's happening here may not seem like it to people from outside who've never heard of it, but it is impacting everywhere because of the water and what's happening to the land here. Like when it made big news when that train crashed with the chemicals in Ohio, that's happening here every day. I mean, the train's not crashing, but the chemicals are getting in the water every day.
Why is it that people haven't really paid attention to this? Why, like, how strong is this effort to cover up this massacre? And why 100 years later, too?
Well, when the massacre happened, the white landowners at the time posted a notice that said, go to work, be quiet, don't say anything, everything is okay now. And that was a hush mouth. That's what it's called in the South, I guess, the hush mouth. And so the threat of, well, they killed 1,000 people and hardly anyone paid attention, so would you talk about it? So people were afraid to discuss it. So a lot of people grew up here and didn't even know the story because their family was afraid to tell. And then people move in and they don't know the story. And so it's only in the last 25 years that the story has been being told more publicly by the descendants. And the other side has a lot to hide, so they do not want that story to get out. So they use their money to make it confusing by paying people to share different versions. And making it seem like they're the right version. Yeah, which makes it murky and complicated. I mean, they just got a black mayor for the first time here. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Moving on to you specifically. So you mentioned that you do genealogical work. Why? What were your motives behind doing genealogy?
Well, growing up, I have my grandmothers are both Irish, and I was raised really being Irish Catholic. But my mother's father is German Catholic, and his family came in the 1880s to the U.S. But I never knew my last name. I didn't know the story of my last name, and that grandfather just said, "Oh, your great-grandfather was put on the doorstep." But I didn't know what that meant. So I started being interested just to figure out my family. And then I went on a family trip to Maine, to Acadia National Park. And in that park, there's a pond that has my last name on it, Hadlock Pond. So I thought maybe we're related to these people. So that's how I got into it. And that was in the 80s. So there was no internet, there was no Ancestry.com. I typed letters to the Connecticut State Historical Society and to Maine and looked in libraries and tried to figure things out. But that's how I got into genealogy. And now lots of people are talking about genealogy.
And how does that make you feel? I mean, are you excited to see this expansion of interest in genealogy?
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand their family story and how they got here. And some of that led me to be interested in reparations. So some of my ancestry goes back to the Mayflower. So it's more like about Native Americans. As far as I know, none of my family members actually enslaved people, but I do feel like in order for us to move forward as a country, there has to be reparations. And I feel that I need to pay reparations because I benefit from white privilege and policies that maintain how things are here.
And what do reparations look like? I mean, is it just money? Is it what?
I don't think it's just money. That's why I believe in the museum. Now, they do need money to build the museum, but I believe like what we're teaching in school, how the story of the United States is told, the fact that how prisons are, what we arrest people for, how land is treated, that everything, I think capitalism and racism are very intertwined and used together. And so having a different way of thinking about what success means is part of reparations to me. The fact that we're arguing about affirmative action is just so ridiculous. But even the way that we think about how to fix that, I think, is part of white supremacy. Like the fact that people think the legal system, or if we just gave everyone a check for $5 million, everything would be fixed. I don't think any of that. Yes, I do think people should get money, but it's so much more than that to me. It's like a complete cultural change.
And you work around these descendants very often. So what have you heard them say about what reparations look like?
For the descendants, it is much more about money and land. It's a lot about returning the land. Yeah, which I believe in too.
In previous interviews, there was mention of a separation in Elaine, a visible whiter side and black side, and it's separated by this ditch. Can you share some light about if you know anything about that ditch? Because I know it has some historical significance.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it is a person-made ditch or if it is natural, and then they decided this is where the dividing line is. Unlike in Helena, West Helena, so in West Helena, I have found the deeds where it says, this is the line, and on this side, like I said, it literally says no white people can live here. And it says no, and they use the word Negro, not black, but no black people can live here. I have not seen that in Elaine, but it seems like the way that it was in Elaine, I think, is more the quarters. I don't know if anyone talked about the quarters. So in Wabash, which is a little north of here before you get to Lakeview, it's where the only still operating Big Gin is, and it's controlled by the two biggest farmers, the Griffins and D-Line Farms, which D-Line Farms doesn't own the land. They are farming the land for a big conglomerate that has land all over the world. And they're not growing any food. What was I answering? Oh, the ditch. So in Wabash and here in Elaine, there's the quarters, which is where the black people lived. It's weird to me that it's called the quarters, but the same thing happened in Rashaw, where like the big white owner lives in the big house, and then all the farmer workers live in a different part. I forgot what it's called in Rashaw. Up farm, something like that. Anyway, there's terms that people use that they don't realize is like, oh, that's interesting, because it's just so regular. But the quarters is the black side of town here, and that has gradually changed, but there's still a dividing line, and still definitely the black side of town, the white side of town. How the ditch is involved, I don't know, but how the ditches are involved here is really important. The drainage system is controlled by different groups of white owners, so they have like their little meeting that decides about all the water. It's called the levee district or the drainage district, and they control how the water flows. So they might not clear out one of the drainage ditches if they don't want the water to go that way. So stuff grows up and then the water won't flow that direction. You know, how the water flows on the land based on how it slopes. You can look at there's some maps that have very, very extreme detail about the different water spots. You can see where the spray that you're putting on is going to go. And now they're growing things that the seeds grow so that whatever that company makes and sprays, only that seed can grow there. So there won't be weeds because you're spraying the dirt and the water to me so that nothing grows. That's happening right here next to the school. Whoever owns that sprays so that there's only one thing that will grow, nothing else will grow there. And only that kind of seed that comes from that certain company that's making money on that also sells the chemical. I mean, that's happening all over the place. It's just so blatantly extreme here that it could be a good lesson for people on what we don't want, I think. I don't know if you see that in Florida. I guess I'm not supposed to ask you questions, but.
I mean, you can ask. The discrimination in Florida is a lot more, and I can't speak for agricultural industries because I don't live in those sections, but it's a lot more in terms of education, I think. But going back to the agriculture sector, you mentioned that D-Line Farms doesn't grow food, so do you know what they do grow?
Oh, nobody here grows food. I mean, none of the big farmers, they don't grow food. They grow cotton, soybeans, corn, that's not for food, and rice. They do grow rice. And I guess that's food.
Mostly just cash crops then?
Yeah.
All right.
And they do have some wheat. At a certain time of year, they grow some wheat, but I don't think that is eating wheat either.
And this is obviously a very big agricultural town. The silos that are around here, one of them apparently is really close to a park, which is terrible placement. So how much do you think it impacts the people here to see where the economy in this section, when this area lies in terms of agriculture, but not being able to access any of that because they simply can't compete with those bigger farmers? So if you've heard them talk about it, how does that make them feel?
I think you should, I mean, you're interviewing people who live here to ask them those questions, but I mean, it's right next those particular granary that just went up that I think actually when Trump was president, the farmers got a certain amount of money that was specifically for that, so they could make more money. If they built a granary, you can store your beans or your corn or soybeans or cotton, I guess, and then wait for the price to go up. So you wait for it to be high and then you sell. But if you don't have a granary to store things, you can't do that. You just have to sell right away. So sometimes that means you don't make as much money as you could have made. So they were getting even medium-sized white farmers that own that granary. It's right next to a black cemetery. So when you're in the cemetery, these giant granaries are right there. And then it's right across from the only playground in Elaine. Yeah, well, they don't care about black people is what it means. Their giant trucks come and spew stuff, and yeah, they don't. I mean, it's just an added racism, like in your face. Yeah. I'm sure that's not how they would talk about it. Mm-hmm. Oh, we're just building a granary. How does it affect anyone? They could still have the playground. They still have the cemetery. I'm sure that's what they would say. But the visual message of it is very different.
Yeah, for sure. Before we conclude the oral history, is there anything that you feel was missed or should be added to this interview?
I know that part of the reason that folks here wanted me and other people who are of European descent, white, that work with the Legacy Center, wanted us to talk about that, kind of why we're doing it. Did I answer that?
I believe so when I asked about non-descendants, like what they can do for descendants, but let's specifically talk about that. So why, to answer your own question, how come?
Yeah. So I was born in the United States, but I did live other places. And I think that does impact my view of the United States. And the way that the United States functions in the world, I think is problematic for me and for my kids and my nieces and nephew. And I want to change that. And part of when organizing, realizing race dynamics playing into capitalism and how that functions here in the United States and other places in the world, and how it continues the downward spiral that we have. Climate change, I think, being the biggest thing coming at us. We have to deal with our past. So even if I personally didn't do some of these horrible things, we have to address them. Like there is no, we can't you just continue on. If we don't address what happened before, it will just still be with us always into the future. It's just hanging there. Like we never apologized. We never said, okay, this was wrong, and we're going to do something to try to heal that. And instead, what happened to Native Americans, what happened to African Americans, what's happening now with immigrants, it just like piles on and on and on. And we have to come up with a different way. And it's really pushing against other people, like the Kardashians and everyone wants to be rich and money, and the most important thing is having these fancy parties and buying stuff. I think all of that has to change. And so this little piece is like what I can do to help to try and shift that. Yeah, so I do it for me and for my family. It's healing me too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I suppose there's nothing else that you want to talk about? Is there?
Oh, there's so much more, but it's okay. That's good. I think this is enough.
All right. Then on behalf of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to sit down with us and contribute to this oral history record. Again, thank you.
Thank you.